Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Michael Tsarion back to the channel. Michael, can you talk to us, please, about the Gospel of the Stars?
Yeah, wow, that's a hell of a subject. And that term, that's a title of a book from the early 20th century, I think. Thomas Burgoyne, maybe, I can't remember, but there's 6 sex symbols in the stars by Busenbach, and umpteen other out-of-print works that deal with that and with what's called uranography. And when I watched your episode with James McHugh, it reminded me of material that I'd put on my first website pertaining to, the planisphere, why it's even a circle, all sorts of extraordinary things, and how it relates to mythology. And in my work, people know that very controversially, I said that these storytellers, these mythmongers, these navigators, whatever, there's so many terms you want to use of the ancient times, these stellar priests, they haven't gone away. Because I talk about logos, advertisements, commercials, even car logos. Not everyone's going to buy into that, but I see in a lot of symbolism that we're using in today's world, like Toyota, those 3 symbols, 3 circles or ellipses. And every time you see, the Christians had it with their triskelion, 3 interlocking circles. Where did that come from? Is it a Christian symbol? And similar symbols that you see on corporate logos and things like that. I was obsessed by this, and the 3 interlocking circles are the 3 circles or circuits that are vital in astrology and astronomy. The Earth moving on its own orbit is one cycle. The Earth moving around the sun is another orbit. That's the second circle. And then the wobble of the Earth, which is the all-important wobble that creates astrology. It's called precession of the equinoxes. We don't want to get into that. But that wobble is another one of these motions that was known in ancient times. So you get the ecliptic, you get the celestial sphere, and you get this wobble. And the wobble, they somehow knew that this is a polar wobble, just like a top spinning, like that. And the pole points upwards to the celestial sphere and makes a movement of 26,000 years, but there's a sort of a 3,700-year movement between each of the stars that it moves to. These are the polar stars. And because we're talking now about the most ancient cult of all, the one where the stellar priests came from, and they made meticulous measurements of the sky. But the little circumpolar area at the extreme north was the most important zone to the original astrologers. And it was called Aru, the fields of Aru, Elysian fields. In Christianity, we get it mentioned as well. But it's really the Garden of Eden in the stellar cult, because each of these motifs were picked up: the holy mountain, the holy tree, the paradiso, the walled garden, this extraordinary precinct. And you get it, you see it all the way down to the modern day. The very first incarnation of it, because there's many, the first Garden of Eden was the northern polar realm in the sky. Then it became terrestrial, because everything celestial becomes terrestrial, and you get the Arctic homeland. And then you get the Arctic homeland. Then a third incarnation was the Garden of Eden as we know it, maybe, in terms of Sumeria or Hittites, or like I said, the early Turks and the Persians, and the Egyptians had it. Even Akhenaten had a physical one built for himself, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whatever, the sacred garden, the little bag, this little sort of pouch or bag that you see the Sumerian king holding, looks like a little basket. Those contained the seeds to show that he was the planter of the garden. We still have that today when these dignitaries go out with a sort of a silver shovel and are seen, planting a tree. It's even in the political world. That comes from thousands and thousands of years ago, with a dignitary, the priest, working for the King Gudea or King Sargon. You'll see them holding this little bag. You see even sometimes they're animal-headed or bird-headed. All of this comes from thousands of years ago, and these are the real, the priests of the stellar cult. Everybody else borrowed from them. But the thing that, if people watch, James's talk, where he's talking about the Uranosphere and his discoveries, at the very basic level, you see from what he's saying there that it is a matter of imagery. that in ancient times, as early as 3,000 to 4,000 years BC, imagery was important. Storytelling was important. They weren't just looking to the sky and mapping it, drawing constellations of Aries and Libra and all of that. What is that? That is imagery. That's pictographs. So the very first alphabet, not just the cuneiform that he talked about, but the Cadmean letters, A, B, C, the ones that the Phoenicians gave to the Greeks, they're images. A is for mountain. O is for the shape of your mouth when you say that letter. M is the flowing waters. S is the sound of the serpent. These are equivalated with symbols. And my goodness, the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Hech, and Taith, and all the rest of them. These are also connected with symbols. Taith is a little serpent. Yod is the famous, looks like a flame, but it can also be a staff. It can also be a tree. Yod is the first letter of Yahweh, who's a tree god. You see, so never, ever, ever in the most distant times was a letter or a number not connected to imagery. So the thing that jumped out was his confirmation of this. The planispheres are just a much more elaborate, because remember, the whole show he did with you was really to show how they're composite. It's not just one symbol there. There's inordinate amount of symbols all compressed into one story. And you get this all over the world, whether it's this story of Billy Goat Gruff, and the troll hiding under the bridge. This is all that can be decoded astrotheologically through these puns and through these similes and through this extraordinary right-brained sort of way that the imagery and language and then mythologies came about. And it's no different in the Christian Gospels, where that was pointed out. And you find it all over the world, where there's terrestrial and the celestial, as above, so below. And the extraordinary way that the ancients did this. So, whether it's the composite symbolism there, and again, as I said, of the alphabet, we have this also. See, when he was speaking about the composite level of it and the multi-levels of meaning in the cuneiform, yes, but did you know that you found that in Scandinavia and in Ireland and the UK? Scotland is a country that remembers this. It's called kenning, Kenning. Anyone can look this up. It actually comes more from Scandinavia, but it lasted so long into the Scottish language and iconography, in which there's up to 5 levels of meaning in a particular, anecdote or letter or saying. I'll give you an example later. One of the earliest poems in recorded history is from Ireland. It's called the Song of Emergen. That's pronounced differently in Gaelic, but let's just keep things simple, right? And Emergen was an old bard, a priest, stellar cult member, and one of the earliest poems in the whole of the West is called the Song of Emergen. We'll look at it in a minute, and you'll see immediately. And I thought when McHugh was talking, that reminds me very much of this poem that I had on my original website. But just take an example of, now this is just an example. Don't take me literally on this, but say girl. So you could have the ideogram for girl, but beside it could be another ideogram for hair. Beside which you could, because long hair was connected to women. And then you might have one that is the symbol, the ideogram for jar of water, for instance, right? Because women went to the well to pick up the water, you see? So it's like that. So it does make sense. Now, the trouble is, as Ralph Ellis points out, the cuneiform has been disfigured by later translators. Schliemann, L.A. Waddell, we'll talk about him in a minute. You see, there's been some chicanery going on. So you don't just have sorcerers today, messing with the symbolism and, the corporate logos and Advil and Seraphim and, Aleve. And like I said, the Toyota symbol, you don't just have this stuff going on today. There's something gone on that when these cuneiform came forth, when they found these tablets, some of the translations are erroneous. You should one day ask Ralph. He's a real expert on that. I guess he hasn't had time to really delve into it, but he knows that there's been deliberate mistranslation. So there's that to bear in mind. But again, going back to the point, the early rabbis, the early Levites, all of those images in the Bible, correct? Yes, they are sidereal motifs based on this uranography. Yes, the Greeks picked up on it. Yes, the Romans got it. This is all axiomatic. But what is always going to be mysterious is the why of it. Why do this? And we have it in our nursery rhymes. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. That's Cancer, the water sign, the pail of water. And going up to the top of the hill is the zodiacal arch. And Jack and Jill is the sun and the moon, who do indeed ascend the arch and then fall back down again. Right? All come tumbling down in the latter part of the northern arch. Jack and a beanstalk, and then you have Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack jumps over the candlestick. That one's as old as time itself. The candlestick being the pole. And in the stellar occult, you get this all coming from the stellar occult of the great candlestick. You get it even in the Bible of the 7 candlesticks. That's a fusion of the 7 polar stars and the candlestick, the menorah. So the Jews have it as the sacred candelabra, and how the sun passes through them. Yeah, well, it wasn't the sun, you see. It was the pole star and the pole, and then this was then abstracted. All this mythology was abstracted and redacted by the mythmongers into the solar cult. Then the lunar cult got it, and then other cults got it, and adapted it all. That's why it seems like it's a tremendous archive, because and then Jesus and his 12 disciples. Yeah, but you had Tiresias and his 12 helpers, and Odysseus and his 12 cycles, and Hercules with the 12 trials, and all of this, and it goes on and on and on. So what happens is that they morph. Different cults pick up on these motifs that come originally from the stellar archive, and then move into the solar. And the thing that's interesting is that each country, say you are talking about Babylon, say you are talking about the Persians, say you are talking about the Irish, the crazy thing is that each of them had these cults in the culture. So it's not so easy to say, well, the Babylonians was the stellar cult, or the Akkadians, or the Assyrians, or the Irish, or no, all the 4 cults were represented there. And if you read the Bible carefully and you can decode it, Daniel in the lion's den, the prophet Joseph, also taken from outside. His brothers sell him into so-called slavery, and next minute, he's advising the Pharaoh. No, not really. But what does that story mean? Daniel, the same thing. So what Ralph Alls calls Pesher, what you might even call Gematria, and certainly what you call Kenning. Kenning is even more or equally sophisticated as what James was showing, because there's up to 5 different levels. Like I said, the girl, the hair, the jar, maybe a sacred animal that she liked. All of this can be in the iconography. And reading from our day today, we go, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it doesn't make any sense then that the serpent is the symbol of the woman as the hieroglyph in Egypt. Sure does, on multiple levels. What? The snake? Ophiolatry? Yeah, because these Egyptians knew what they were talking about. There's multiple, it's a symbol of the great royal wives, which is the original dragon court that everyone talks about but doesn't get right. So lots of these things. There's a man, actually, when James was talking about punning, there's a writer called Pierre Sabak. You might be able to look up a few of his videos. Who's brilliant on that, although his focus is Arabic. We've done lectures together in England and places like that, and his work, he wrote a book. He was meant to write more, but he only got one out, and it's called The Murder of Reality, I think is the name, if correct. Now, he is an expert on Arabic, and he insists that Arabic is a punning language, like, just insane. So when I heard James, I'd never heard before in my whole life until I watched your show, that there is punning involved in even Sumerian and Babylonian, Akkadian, and all of that. That's extraordinary. That just, I couldn't believe it. I mean, that's the first time I've ever heard of it. Then it reminded me also of one of the greatest scholars that's ever been, again suppressed because of the work that he's done, in the 1800s. Now there's L.A. Waddell. I have a page on him on my Irish Origins of Civilization website. People can go there. But L.A. Waddell was a military colonel, lieutenant colonel or whatever, who was just an unbelievable polymath. Right? Spoke about 5 Indian languages, wrote books on the flora and fauna of Tibet. And that's when he wasn't doing the 5 monumental works he did on race, the movement of the races, the migration of tribes, and the subject matter of the bringers of civilization. And I mentioned to you on a previous show that he thought that Turkey, not only Turkey, northern Pakistan, everything, there's Egypt, but Turkey was a ancient Anatolia, the land of the Hittites, far exceeded the relevance of Greece. You could almost think that the Grecians were almost a colony of the great, Hittite Empire. But they are the ones who seeded Sumeria. They've covered this up. Sumeria is not a distinct group. Sumeria is the settlement for mercantile purposes and strategic purposes of this Hittite Empire. The Hittites went east, found that area, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and said, we like this. This is going to be good for our trade, and we're grabbing this. So Sumerian, what we call Turkey, Anatolia, Egypt, is a ginormous triangle of culture and civilization. And Sargon was king of Egypt, and his son Menes was king of Egypt. Now, I'm saying this because Menes is one of the most important pharaohs. He's recognized as the first pharaoh of the first dynasty of Egypt. But his name is also Aha Manu. I think it means something like strong arm or strong bowman. Don't quote me on that. Aha Manu. It might even mean great hawk or something like that. It's been so long I can't remember. But the point is not that. The point is that pharaohs in general had 5 names. And the name that you know the pharaoh by, say Akhenaten, for instance, or Thutmose, is the 5th and least important name. It is the name that is the public name. So it ties in with what James was saying. You have these, dignitaries and priests, because the pharaoh is nothing more than the high priest. Pharos nous, enlightened mind. So mind on fire. So these are the people, even their names, their personal names, some were secret, some were highly sacred, and others were more for the public. So this kind of caper was quite common back then. But back to the point, L.A. Waddell, I mentioned him because those logograms, when the cuneiform is translated into these logograms, they tend to be only of 3 letters. Ahu, things like that. Gan, Gor, Mikkel, right? They break them down into almost syllables, and these are the logograms, and then they'll put a dot and then another one and another one. So you can have a string of them, but they're very short often, no more than just 3 letters, and that's why you get them today, with AMA, APA, an EU, and flags that are tricolor. These go back. They have a long history, and certain companies only just use the 3, FBI, CIA, this kind of thing. These are phonograms. And when you really get into it, it's absolutely extraordinary, But I just wanted to mention some of the pioneering men. L.A. Waddell was a very close friend of Schliemann, who discovered Troy and dug up half of the Middle East that give us these tablets, these cuneiform, and they translated them correctly. And what they found was so incendiary, it rewrote the history of Europe and the world, that they had to be categorically suppressed by the institutions. And even these men were eminent. There were 5 different letters after their name. They had degree after degree after degree, but that doesn't save you. And another character I would mention is E.A. Wallace Budge, the great Egyptologist. He also knew that there had been forgery and that there had been interpolation. So this is not by any means just a regular scholastic subject. There's been total chicanery involved in hiding the facts about these lands that we're talking about. But the very idea that imagery, storytelling was key to ancient men, I think is extremely interesting. And, the uronographs, how you would go about pictorializing Ares, and the man, the man with the little sheep around his shoulders, and all the images we know come out of this. And it's absolutely extraordinary when you start getting into it. But the reason that really sparked my interest is because James forgot to mention that the greatest set of uranographs, stellar images, snapshots that exist are the tarot cards. Now, I've been teaching this for years, right? That especially the major arcana of 22 cards are exactly the greatest condensation that we know. And they come out of ancient times, all right? They come out of Egypt. But they are the most They epitomize everything he was saying because they're literally pictures. And they're, the cards, like the Fool card and the Hangman and the Tower. And so, I've studied all my life, and my feeling is that they're stellar, right? They come from the stellar cult when it's the 7 northern stars that were worshipped, venerated, pole stars, and that was the original Garden of Hesperides, the original stellar archetype or anti-type. Everybody nicked it, so you'll find it everywhere else. But the anti-type is what we need to deal with, and that's the original northern circumpolar zone, which was called the Egyptians called it the land of the everlasting ones. When a soul dies, and if they've been very, very pure, like the pharaohs, they go. So the Bear constellation, Ursa Minor, Draco, and Draco, there was nothing evil about these serpent images. They became evil later when the mythmongers ran out of ideas and then cast the serpent, poor serpent, in a negative light. In the original stellar cult, it protected the pole. It protected the holy garden. That's why it's there. It was a protecting daemon, and actually was connected to 2 goddesses, Wadjet and Nekhbet. Wadjet was the serpent goddess, and Nekhbet was the vulture goddess. So if you look closely at the headdresses of pharaohs, you'll see 2 diadems on the crown. One is a vulture, and the other is a serpent. Sometimes they just show you the cobra serpent. Those are the 2 goddesses. And to become pharaoh, you had to be a worshiper of those 2 goddesses and everything in their cult. But they are the rulers of the northern hemisphere. And I get into this in my 2 books, Trees of Life. So, but the serpent was actually their child. Right? We said that the serpent represented the mother goddess Wadjet, but also in another context, the serpent was her little child. That's where the crocodile comes from. That's why crocodile fat was used to anoint the pharaoh. Crocodiles were sacred because of Wadjet and Nekhbet. And so the little crocodile of the Nile was their child, their baby, their protector. This is just the way the ancient mythographers did it. The mythmongers kind of made a mess of it. But the original thing was the crocodile fat was the chrism. That's where you get Christ. The crocodile fat had many names. They make it into little cakes with mud from the bank of the Nile. It was called mess. That's where we get the Messiah from. Messiah comes from an Egyptian word meaning little cakes of mud and crocodile fat that were symbolizing the goddesses and the river and the Nile and Isis and a lot of things like that. But the Christos or the Karast was the crocodile fat when it was used specifically for initiating the pharaoh. That's the real Christ, was the pharaoh. So you get a lot of this, right? Going back to Egypt. Now, back to the tarot. Punning. You'll never understand the tarot unless you understand punning. So I'm like, I'm listening to your show and I'm like, oh, who is this guy, that's mentioning this? As I said, Pierre Sabak had mentioned it in connection to Arabic, but to go even before that is unique. So, just wanted to recommend that James's work there. But look at the tarot card, the famous tarot card of the Fool. Now, there's been many renditions, I know, but let's just pick the famous one where he's got the pack over his back, the staff and the little bag. That's phallic. So the pun is about springtime being phallic, because that's when the god had inseminated the earth in an earlier period, and then Janus or whoever, and then the spring comes. So the bag is the pack, but it's the testes and the phallus that contains the seeds for new life, and the Fool represents now new life, the sun rising on the horizon. Yeah, but that's Aries, isn't it? Yeah. So then the word arise, like arise, Sir Knight. Aries gives rise to the word arising, and April, the month, the calendar month in which this arising happens, is called aperio. April comes from the Latin aperio, which means to open, eye open. So again, pun after pun after pun, and it goes across the board. There are hundreds of examples of this. Take Capricorn. That's a very strange name. Where does Capricorn? It's made up of 2 syllables, Kephra and unicorn. Again, just to demonstrate how opposites were important, because Kephra has nothing to do with Capricorn. Kephra is the beetle that has to do with Cancer, right? The Northern Arch and the little beetle that was sacred to many cults in Egypt, which pulls pushes the sun up to the heavens, up to its highest point. well, what's happened here? Well, these mythmongers are not, the mythographers, these stellar cult priests, were very interested in what's called paranatelons. There's 88 of them, all around the ecliptic. So they saw that the stars of Cancer are there in the sign of Capricorn at night, because of the movement of the earth. So Caphra, corn, and corn was unicorn because it wasn't a goat. I think that the goat thing came in much later. The original symbol of Capricorn possibly was a unicorn, a white unicorn. And so this is where you get corn and Caphra. But Caphra is actually the beetle of all things. But the constellation would show up in the part of the sky dedicated to December. So this is just another example of how opposites mattered a great deal. To give you a more better example than that is Minotaur, right? Well, that's the ending of Gemini and the beginning of Taur. Mina, Gemini, right? Gemini, and Taur. And why this is important that they created this mythology about a weird animal that lives in a labyrinth and it's called the Minotaur and the hero has to come upon it. Well, it's the hero's journey. You find it everywhere. But that particular collier of the zodiac is important. That's why they wrote the mythology, because that's where the Milky Way runs through. And so you had the pharaoh on his boat. That was another allusion to the pharaoh, to the Milky Way. Minotaur is a very important place where the Milky Way runs, and you get all these other weird astronomical phenomena, meteors up there and stuff like that. But if you follow the river of the Milky Way down through the zodiac, it runs through near Sagittarius and Scorpio. And so the tarot preserves symbolism of that. The planispheres have a lot to do with that. And the little pharaoh is in his boat. You'll see this image of Ra in his boat, or Horus. And that was an old symbol saying he's on the royal highway. The Milky Way is the royal road, and he will exit the universe. He will exit the cosmos when he gets to galactic center. Another motif is why you got Sagittarius with a bow and arrow, because the arrow points to the center of galactic center, which was called Scutus. You can look up on a star map right now and you'll see it says Scutus. Scutus means target. It actually means shield, but it meant the target that the centaur or the bow person, and then you get it in Robin Hood, and you get the bowman in hundreds of corporate advertisements. This was an ancient motif, and even a lance. You'd be amazed at the kenning that goes on with this, like you said, the punning. But the idea was that the enlightened one, they have it in Mexico. Ixbala, Shibala, they call it. The same road, the same Milky Way, and the same hero or warrior or king floating down it and then exiting out through the galactic center. And the bowman or the horseman, it's anybody pointing, that was the point always to galactic center. And then when people pick this up and they got statues in their homes, that might do that. Of course, it's all misaligned. A lot of these Illuminati houses and royal houses have this motif, but often, it's been moved or whatever. You get, in Greece, you got this phenomenon of the Herm, Herme, which were phallic-like busts that they put at specific areas on the land. Remember the field? He was speaking about the planisphere, the field, a square. And that did indeed represent ratio, and it represented, as I told you, the inseminating of the earth. And often it was the goddess Priapus. There's two gods, there's Pan, Priapus, and Herm. And statues of these gods, similar to Janus, a bust, but often it would have a phallic aspect to it, were put strategically all through the land. And then later on in Europe, it happened a lot, but it kind of happened in Greece. The Romans picked up on it. And that was just to do the same thing. Hey, we want fertility in our fields. Come on, goddess. But we'll put these phallic symbols around to symbolize that we're aware that the sunlight will have to come and inseminate the earth. And we'll be aware that the male seed inseminates the earth, and this will encourage growth. It will encourage the fields to bloom and things like that. It's just, again, another way that the ancients did it. But the center of the stellar world was this circumpolar zone, which becomes our Elysian fields, and it becomes Hesperides. And the serpent was the protector serpent, Agathodaimon. You can look that up. Agathodaimon is the original name. And these first people were into it. That is why the Jewish calendar starts at midnight. They were a matriarchy, number one. Descendants was always through the mother's line. and their calendar began at midnight. They were a lunar people. Yahweh is a lunar god, based on other deities from before. So, and also because why lunar? Well, who sees the stars at night? The navigators, these original Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians are they call them Phoenician Canaanites, but they are the originators of the Jews. They're the same thing. They're just they're the fathers, the antecedents of what we call the Hebrews. And not even that is a completely wrong word to use. That comes from a word called Iberu, which meant saints, the high sages, the high astrologers. So prior to them, just like in the last program, we talked about the antecedents of the Greeks, so many of them. So the Jews had their ancestors as well. They have many, many names. Iberu would be one of them that we use as Hebrew, right? But these are the navigators. And of course, navigators, they want to be out at night, because then you're out in the open sea and you see above you the great dome of the sky with all the stars. So really, navis, navigator, right, is a code word still used in Masonic circles to represent these stargazers. And of course, there was a goddess cult as well. You get that turning up in the Holy See of the Roman Catholic Church, because it's the sea, the Great Sea, is actually a euphemism for the stars. People don't know that. So when somebody crosses the ocean, they're not talking about a physical ocean. They're talking about the metaphorical, another pun. And the sea serpent and the sea dragon came, and this happened and that happened. It's all about star lore. Unbelievable. The story of John the Baptist and his beheading, that has to do with what appears above the horizons. Jesus born in the manger, is to do with cancer, and the Holy Family have to cross a wilderness. Well, cancer was called the wilderness. There's a little constellation up there right now called Cradle. So it just becomes the manger. The donkey and the ass are always connected to Cancer. That was one of its early symbols. I mentioned Kephra, the crab, but also it is the ass or the donkey. So when he's riding into Jerusalem, and all the rest of it, this all decodes back to lore. In fact, the very Gospels, 4 of them are the cardinal points of the zodiac, not just the calendar, but Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John represent the grand cross that is the zodiac. And then, the stories unfold. So they're already telling you, by the fact that there was 4 Gospels, it's a hint, it's a pun. And if you know how to decode it, then you'll know which one of them represent which signs. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have to go into the etymology and look at that. And I've got that all in my Astrotheology book. So the way that their minds worked, take another motif that's very common, the Great Hunt. You see the Pharaoh on his chariot, that's Cancer. The sign of Cancer is next to Leo. And of course, Leo and Cancer represent the 2 thrones, the sun and the moon, the queen and the king. But when you see the Pharaoh on his hunt, don't you see in the Celtic countries, the hunt for the white stag? And you always see this fountain motif, the white deer. It'll become pertinent in a minute when we read the Song of Emergen. And also then the whole underworld, right? When the sun does drop below the horizon and goes through these 6 signs, they were called the underworld, counterpointing the 6th overworld arch. But you get this motif in mysticism and esotericism called the underground stream. And it was said, so you say, like the Milky Way, that has both an upper world manifestation and it has this lower world as it moves towards galactic center. So there was always an idea in the ancient times that there were these 2 hemispheres, 2 realms of the descent into the underworld, where you meet, trials and challenges and weird hybrid beasts, and so on. And when you wanted to cover for this, you just would say, "I've drank of the underground stream," and everyone would know. You see, if you put this in a poem or a piece of writing, they go, "Oh, okay, we understand what this means." And it has an but the underworld is also the overworld. It's the black dome of the sky. Think about another pun would be, Samson was told to go and grind the corn. And up in Scandinavia, you've got Mjolnir, the great wheel, the great weight that crushes the grain. And you get this in the story of Samson when he's put down into the underworld and given this extraordinary job to do, because, oh, you're so powerful, you're the big boy. Yeah, let's give you some real work to do. And everybody mocks Samson. Well, that motif of the millstone is the mill of the great seat, the great round of the zodiac. That's a pun on it. In Welsh mythology, they've got Caer Shidi, right? It's called a fort or a castle, but it goes round and round and round, or it's called a revolving chair. Same thing again. Round table in the later Arthurian legends. You get the same in Ireland, the idea of this circularity. These are all puns in a story. And the knights of the table who have all these different adventures. Even the symbol of a chalice is a metaphor for the dome of the night sky. And oh, Jesus, if you study Masonry, you'll find out that it's just absolutely loaded with this. But and also another motif that jumps to mind is the motif of twins. Set and Horus, Sir Balin and Sir Balin, Mark and Arthur. The twin motif, the dark sister and the light sister, that is found all over the world. And that twins comes from, again, the sign of Gemini. Should be obvious to people there. And these are just the ones off the top of my head that I can remember. But let's go to qualify the story of the West. Let's go to the poem for a minute, if we could. The Song of Emergen. People can look it up. It's translated from the Gaelic. And now, if you go back and listen deeply to what James was saying, and now you come back to this and read this poem, remember it? What thousands of classicists never even dreamed of, let alone could translate properly, you'll be able to translate. So I'll just read through it. He says, it begins, I am the wind on the sea. I am the wave of the sea. I am the bull of 7 battles. And that can also mean battlements, but just let's keep it as it is, battles. I am the eagle on the rock. I am the flesh from the sun. I am the most beautiful of plants. I am a strong wild boar. Remember the killing of the bull by Mithra, right? I am a salmon in the water, and we could just deal with that symbolism in Celtic mythology, the sacred salmon of wisdom. We could go on and on. I am a lake on the plain. I am the word of knowledge. Wait a minute. Word of knowledge in the beginning was the word, the logos. It's in Ireland the years before. Okay. I am the head of the spear in battle. King Saul is the thrower of the great spear. Look it up. It's all taken from Irish mythology, the god Lu and other things. He says, I am the head of the spear in battle. I am the god that puts fire in the head. I am the god that puts fire in the head. I mean, what could that possibly mean? Who spreads the light in the gathering on the hill. So I'm the god who spreads light on the gathering on the hill. We talked last time about the importance of that God is without, right? Before he became within, you worshiped him at a sacred zone, a sacred place. Who can tell the ages of the moon? Who can tell the place where the sun comes to rest? So these lines about, and also being an eagle, in the story of Ireland, you see the shape-shifting involved here. Emergen can actually also become a stag. He calls himself the stag of the 7 antlers in other versions of the poem. But the last lines there, who can tell the ages of the moon, and who can tell where the sun comes to rest, is purely zodiacal, as is the rest of it. There's in another version, it's like, I am he of the 7 hurdles. The hurdles were like battlements or protections around Tara. You'll often hear Tara, the capital city of the kings of Ireland, being protected by 7 hurdles. But this is, you find this in Tolkien, you find it in a lot of, in fact, the number 7, as we said, is the hurdles up there. So every time you see the number, you're talking stellar cult originally. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, even that, you'd be amazed where that comes from. So, yeah, these are examples. So look at your nursery rhymes, look at your mythographs, look at your fairy tales, and that kind of thing. And then also pay a bit of attention to the symbolism of the logos that are around you. And the storytelling, that if we went back to the dawn of time, this idea to read the star is nothing more than looking at a screen. It's like, this is the storytelling. This is how you educated your children, you know, to be as strong as the ram and proud as the lion, and to, you know, be as brave as the goat or whatever. And then study coats of arms, the heraldry of the world, all of it. We just mentioned the lion and the unicorn, all of the heraldry that you can think of. But as James is pointing out, it's even living stories that you have to know how to decode. And, you know, yes, it can be complicated because there's that composite aspect. One thing can have 7 different meanings. You know, the ideograms that came together to make a particular cuneiform form, they can be from multiple different races even, because we're talking about a stellar cult is all over the world. And so just like a military general will have a badge of honor, that in it, the picture in it will retell where he fought the battle, what rank he was, you know, and all this other information can be incorporated into a flag or a crest or a logo and heraldry. So it is with these. These letters must be looked at as crests, and they contain multiple informations. It's like when you have to go to get heraldry, and your ancestors were keepers of the hawk or the falcon. You know, you could have a bow and arrow. You can decide what you want. You could say, well, we were barbers, so let's have a scissors on there, right? And just in exactly that way, these things can become composite in order to exemplify your tutelary god. Many families actually took a tutelary symbol from the stars. So we're born under Virgo. We identify with that. Well, that'll have to be featured. So then on even army logos and all sorts of logos, you'll see stars. Look at the Subaru company with its 7 stars, the Pleiades. Well, Subaru is Japanese for the Pleiades. Don't think for a moment that this has gone anywhere. All the aristocratic families are using this. The great stag with the crown, the 7 crowns. Look at alcohol. That's where I started, looking at hard alcohol bottles in these liquor stores. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. And I started asking, where is this all coming from? These Hennessy's and the symbols that they're using, and harp and all the rest of it. We could get into that for hours and hours and hours. And it's all goes back to the stellar. As we said, you know, your nursery rhymes, don't forget those. They contain Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and nobody could put him back together again. That is recalling a pole shift, which often people forget is the slippage of the egg. It's not just the whole earth turning like that. That it's a common understanding of pole shift, but it's not particularly correct. The greatest minds that ever worked on the subject, like Charles Hapgood, said, no, it was actually slippage of the crust of the earth. The pole actually remains the same. So there's, you know, and if that was experienced in ancient times, just like he said, the flood, the reason why it took 1,000 years or more to enter the story of the flood is because of trauma. It takes 1,000 years for people to process it. And then only, you know, when they put it into writing, because now they've got the guts to do so, because the thing had traumatized the hell out of the whole world. Yeah, you don't just go scribbling about that, you know, 2 minutes later. Some things take thousands of years to process, you know, which is very, very important. Now, the layout of cities is involved in this. The geomancy that's involved also has a stellar aspect. I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here, but extraordinarily important. And then the motif. Say you find a motif where the hero is in fact wounded, like in the case you see jumps to mind of the Fisher King. But Jesus had the 5 wounds. Various other disciples are crucified, or St. Stephen was stoned. Where's this all coming from? Do you think it really happened? Daniel thrown into the lion's den. You really think that actually happened? These trials of the hero and his wounding, his stigmata, are all based in the underworld cycle that we spoke of. There's no way, and blindness is a classic. that for some reason the sun goes out. Well, what better way to personify the sunlight disappearing into the underworld than to say the hero is blinded? But it didn't end there. He could have a wounded foot. He could have a, like Samson, his hair shorn off or whatever it may be, right? A Jonah in the whale. Well, the whale is Cetus. And did you know that the three last signs, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, which are the last three, that whole area of sky was actually called the underground sea. Remember we said holy sea? The whole of those three signs was known as the abyss, the darkest part of the zodiac that the hero has to go to. He'll meet a fantastic monster. He's in the shit. I mean, he'll be, it's the darkest part of the underworld cycle. And so a great many of the tarot card motifs, speak of this or preempt this. And maybe there's a guardian deity that'll help. Carry a torch. Wow, you can just get into the whole thing, right? So riding on the donkey into Jerusalem, navigating the seas, calling himself the fisherman. And every single motif you can think of in the Gospels and the Holy Scriptures does indeed come from a uranography, as it was called, sidereal mythology, as I call it, right? And often it's the opposite. There's so much myth-mongering going on that to get through it all into the original stellar mythography is sometimes difficult, the mythos. Because the serpent, as I said, is a classic one. It represented woman. Woman represented the garden. See like this, in one of the great interpretations of the garden, it's the Garden of Idun, the garden of the goddess. This is the place she retires to languish, to contemplate. So the myth, it was a sacred precinct, somewhat like a harem would be today, a sacred precinct in which veiled women or the woman, and it's always the queen. It's only the queen can enter this garden. No man can enter it. And the serpent then represented her guardian, a Agathodaimon, that protected the golden apples on the tree. And there were oranges. Did you know that? In the Garden of Hesperides, with the sacred animal, the sacred fruit, remember, that Hercules has to steal, and he has to fight the Hydra. He has to fight the serpent, who's the protector of the tree. So you always get the tree and the serpent. And in the East, you get the Kundalini, the serpent and the tree. It's all over the place. But actually, it's female symbolism. And Eden was her name. It was the Garden of Idun, the goddess. And she languished there, and nobody else was able to invade it. And in one of the stories, that the purest version of this is, as I said, the Anatolian, the Hittite story. And the goddess in this case, can't remember her name, had been from a foreign tribe of enemies that married into the Hittite king. This was done for peace negotiations. So she comes from the monstrous side. This is extraordinary. She's a beautiful, one of those beautiful women in the world, but her tribe is the great enemy of the Hittites. But they married, just in the same way that in Ireland mythology, the two most beautiful men who ever lived are from the demonic side. Why are you getting this motif again in another Aryan area? Because these are worldwide. So the sun and the moon, the sun is the king and the moon is the fairest in the heavens. And in the stellar cult, they were Jack and Jill, who their whole mythology and their trials and tribulations and their chemical wedding and all this was connected to the 7 northern stars. And in my astrotheology book, I go into that very deeply. I make it pretty much the center of that, these motifs, this wedding in the heavens. And then another thing to say is so important about this is that really nobody's going to get a hold on why we looked up, because we talked about the look. See, the real question in all of this is, what on earth would anybody want to look up for in the first place? And then to abstract meanings, and then not one meaning or two meanings, but all these interlocked meanings. Why? What is going on? Why would this be even a pastime? And we know it wasn't a pastime. Whole cultures and civilizations. The priests that James was talking about were the highest in the land. They were advisors to Pharaoh. So where did this motif, this phenomena actually come from? Well, in my article, From Heaven to Earth, I explained this. And that is that the there was a fire in the sky. There was a cataclysmic events in which a great constellation, a great conjunction between Saturn, Mars, and Venus came about that was seen. And the great plasma displays, an extraordinary thing that looked apocalyptic. It's actually where apocalypse comes from. The idea of, 7 great scrolls, and I explain it in the article. All of this comes from, and as we said, there's many, many observations of the planets. So this precession of the equinox is one of the great keys to understanding why astronomers looked up. The uranography that James is explaining dovetails. And third, the individual behavior and character of planets is to be chalked in. So just like we said about the Earth, its own movement, its wobble, and then its movement around the solar system are 3 things that coalesced and became, the 3 symbols of the badge. The shamrock, your silly little stupid Irish shamrock, if you only knew. And the Copts in Egypt knew this, and you wore that. Just like the Pope today, if you look at the bishops, the design of their clothes, you'll see these 3 interlocking spirals or circles. They know what you don't know. That's astrological. And the astrologer generals would wear this. They'd wear it around their necks. 3 interlocking circles. Mars has a very sharp orbit. So it was called the blade and given to be the god of war. Venus has a very soft, gentle orbit. So she's the goddess of love. Uranus spins on its side. So Uranus was given to the Fool card, who's the crazy one, Lamato, mad, because it's, and so Saturn has the rings, and, on and on it goes. The very characteristics of the planets, that the moon, for instance, reflects light, is to be, you can just get into it in a way that would be non-stop. I've studied it all my life. And so they're taking those, and they're taking the 7 candelabra, and, so many things we couldn't go into that come from this. But the idea of looking up in the first place happened because you were forced to look up. Something actually happened in the heavens. Now, the people who discovered this, David Talbot, who wrote, who made the presentation Thunderbolt in the Sky. If you go to the bottom of the article, you'll see all the links. He's sketchy on the dates. If you factor in what James is saying, this event in the heavens must have happened at least 3,000 years ago. I'm happy with that. I don't have any problem pushing it way, way back, because that look at the level of understanding is already very, very advanced. Your Daniel and your Archimandrites, your Magi, this level of kenning, this level of what he spoke about when he's talking about the puns is so intricate that didn't just come in 5 minutes. These people have had at least 500 years or 1,000 years to get with this, which means the event, if I'm right, happened back then. But, I don't make the dates that important because there's many celestial events. There was even a comet issue that we've spoken about before. So I don't really care about the dates. It was 10,000 BC or 3,000. Everybody's going to chime in with their own theory. What it did was it turned our heads up to look at the stars. Are these messages from the gods? And if they are, you better be paying attention. So a group of astronomy began with people getting up at night and observing the messages of the stars. Then you got to do one better than that. You've got to interpret. Well, you try it. You see a couple of meteors. They come out every year. The Taurids at the time of, in fact, we just had them recently. As we pass through the sign of Taurus and Gemini, you get these flashes on the sky, these meteor storms. They happen every year. And so on and so on and so on. And not to mention even the movement of the sun and all the things we've mentioned. You interpret it. Well, it's a great river, I think. And the king rows the boat, as he's passing through the heavens or something. Oh, and he meets a ferocious animal. Oh, but not only that, he meets a goodly animal, the white stag, and he heals his wounds at the fountain. You see, this is what we're dealing with. And then some of them really take hold. And this is how, in my female Illuminati, the essence of that concept is that the women were the better interpreters. As these events happened and people got less traumatized, they had taken actual snapshots of this great conflagration in the sky. And then, and this was on parchment, this was on vellum, this was even on clay. They drew it in the sand. It's the reason why we still see shapes in the clouds, just to make it really simple. When you look at clouds and you see dragons and you see horsemen and you see apocalyptic figures, and children will say, "Mommy, I see something in the sky." You get that phenomena from this, because every time you looked up back then, it was so traumatizing, you'll never forget it, even if millennia goes by. So this, you saw some fire-breathing animal or whatever it might be. So the looking up had to be interpreted. Phenomena in the sky had to be interpreted, and you had to do it right. So they said, well, Venus is the goddess, and she was talking to Mars, and this is how you get it. Because they felt so honor bound to get it right, because devastation may come again. This was a great sign, and you better interpret it correct. So priesthoods come from this moment. That, don't worry about the dates, right? You get the priest. We're talking here about Christianity on your channel. These are things that will never tell you. There's no Sunday school teachers ever going to tell you this. Where did that black robe come from? Where did that white collar come from? Why did all the different sacraments? Why the adoration of the number 12? Why the Mother Mary? Why is she, sitting on? Why is she standing on a crescent moon? Why is there a serpent there? All the whole palaver of it. Why is the green man to be seen everywhere you go in Vatican City, and on and on? Bacchus, oh, don't like symbolism. Yeah, well, what's your IHS? Oh, well, forget about that one. We allow that. Oh, the sun behind it. No, we'll allow that. We'll allow that. Yeah, but what about the star that the Magi followed to Jesus's cradle, the manger? That relates to Cancer. Going across the great wilderness, that's Cancer. They all did it. Abraham, Joseph, Moses, and Jesus, and John the Baptist. A lot of wilderness traversals around. What's with that? Well, everybody in the ancient world knew what's with that. But the thing is, if you can have kenning in the West, and you can have these puns in the East, this multi-level of interpretation, then that's global. Look at the characters of the Japanese or Chinese alphabets. You call that uncomplicated? So this extraordinary, and hieroglyphics, you think they're not complicated? So why this complication? Is because looking at the heavens wasn't just a pastime of some shepherds on the hill. This was an absolute unfurling of the scroll of the divine. And then back to the tarot. There is no greater canon, no greater in the whole of history than the major arcana to concretize these symbols. And they are puns. I give a couple of examples there. They work on puns as well, and you can decode them. And it's key to the esoteric lore. And the esoteric key to that is then, again, it's going to open your right brain, because nobody can read those puns and those symbols. Why does the high priestess have a cross? And why does the cross represent number 10? I mean, what's going on? You've got to be able to decode it. And some cards are, more clear than others, and others are a little bit more obscure, so to speak. But they go with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. But the Hebrew alphabet is not Hebrew; it's Iberu, and the Iberu are quite a different group of people. They are the high stellar cult, and they seeded the mythographies that everybody else, all the proles, the second stalls. The guys outside in the street going, what's going on then? Yeah, everybody else got it, bits of it. And this is where your talismans and omens and gematria and your superstitions and your crests and your heraldry and your flags. And as I said, corporate logos, it hasn't gone away. That's why it inspired me, all through my life, because this has not gone away. And when you understand how they're working with double meanings and entendres and innuendos, and this symbolic archive, how rich it is, now you'll understand why the bull is being used in the corporate world, or the stag turns up, or the lion is seen on corporate civic centers. And the whole, like I said, I went into in great detail in Astrotheology, the book, and there's good stuff on the website as well, but we can leave it there. But yeah, James's work is phenomenal in that he's able to take this particular motif of the complexity of a word, a single letter, and to show its composites, right? Because ideograms were paintings, images. They became phonograms because a sound was then attributed to whatever it was, the letter A, or a particular hieroglyph, or in this case, a hierogram. These are really hierograms that he's talking about. So first they started as symbols, which mean they had to be connected to the right brain. But then we got to pronounce them with a word that's a phonogram, where certain sounds How did the letter S get to be having the sound S? Do you know how deep this thing goes? And that's also one of the greatest cases for that, when you study Sanskrit and other Urdu and things like that, is from the animal world. The sounds were pronounced by the baboon, the ape, various birds, the call of a various animal. That's how we learned to associate sounds, phonograms, with, you see, letters. And some of the Hebrew alphabets and Phoenician, you'll see this. You'll see these animal motifs, because that was the ground of all intelligence. And today we, what do? We hinterland that, we exploit it. The whole of nature is just some decoration that we can exploit to make our tables and chairs and houses. We're mad. We've gone insane. The ancients understood that these animals, and some were more important than others, of course, but these animals were sacred. They were the gateway or the portal to the gods. They spoke through sacred birds. That's why Odin had the two crows, and the horse, and you name it. This all comes from there. But also came letters. How do I make a sound that represents the horse running, for instance, or water flowing, or the call of a particular animal? And so, this then became song, and this became language, and sea being the crescent moon. The whole thing's absolutely amazing when you can. U is the urn, that's always female, the uterus. Z is the lightning flash. Once you're able to decode it properly, then you realize this came from navigators, this came from Phoenicians, people who loved the sea, people who loved this night sky, and their iconography and their gods and their goddesses all, emanated out of this. But the key to it all is the astrotheology. So any churchman, anybody who's meant to be into religion, who doesn't understand the power of the night sky, they're still in kindergarten level.
Michael Tsarion, thank you.